They started digging under my house while I was sleeping, and if I hadn't noticed the faint vibrations in my bedroom floor that night, I might never have discovered the secret that nearly destroyed my family, my home, and an entire corrupt HOA. The sound was subtle at first, like a distant subway rumble, but it kept growing until it felt like my walls were whispering warnings. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, realizing something was horribly wrong beneath my feet. What I uncovered would expose lies, greed, and a scheme so bold it felt straight out of a thriller, yet it was happening to me, right here in my quiet suburban neighborhood. My name is Alex, and I'd moved into Willow Ridge Estates only 6 months earlier, hoping for peace after years of city chaos. The HOA sold the place as a perfect community, complete with manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and strict rules to keep everything looking pristine. At first, it all seemed harmless, almost comforting. But beneath that polished surface lurked something rotten. Letters started appearing in my mailbox, filled with vague warnings about structural assessments and community improvements. I ignored them, assuming it was typical HOA bureaucracy. That night, though, changed everything. I pressed my ear to the floor and heard the unmistakable scrape of metal against dirt. Someone was digging under my house. My first thought was a gas leak or some kind of utility work gone wrong, but when I checked the city records online, nothing was scheduled. The realization hit me like ice water: this was secret, and it was deliberate. The next morning, I confronted the HOA office. Their manager, a woman named Karen with a perfectly rehearsed smile, brushed me off with corporate-sounding reassurances. She said it was probably soil settling and suggested I file a maintenance request. But her eyes flickered when I mentioned the noises, and that tiny hesitation told me everything. I decided to investigate on my own. Crawling into my basement, I noticed fresh cracks in the concrete and a faint draft where none should have been. Using a flashlight, I followed the airflow and found a hidden opening behind a stack of old boxes the previous owner had left behind. Beyond it, a narrow tunnel stretched into darkness, lined with fresh wood supports. Someone had built this recently, and they were trying to keep it hidden from me. I realized then that my house wasn't just a home anymore. It was the center of a secret operation, and I was standing right on top of it, whether the HOA liked it or not. And I knew if I stayed silent, they would keep digging, until everything I owned finally collapsed beneath me for good. The tunnel led toward the HOA office beneath our street. I followed cautiously, counting each step as dirt shifted ominously. Wooden beams creaked above while distant machinery hummed below steadily. Someone was definitely working down here despite official denials everywhere. I recorded video on my phone documenting every suspicious detail. The air smelled of fresh earth and chemical solvents strongly. They were reinforcing the tunnel like a permanent structure underground. That meant plans far bigger than simple inspections existed clearly. Suddenly footsteps echoed ahead and I ducked behind timbers quietly. 2 men in contractor vests discussed blueprints and payment schedules. They mentioned Karen approving extra funds for this secret project. Hearing her name confirmed my worst suspicions instantly beyond doubt. I waited until they passed, then crept forward slowly alone. The tunnel sloped upward toward the HOA building foundations nearby. A hidden entrance appeared disguised as a storage crawl space cleverly. I realized they were accessing underground utilities illegally through properties that allowed them to reroute water lines for profit secretly. Homeowners were being overbilled while siphoned resources filled HOA accounts. My house was simply the easiest access point chosen deliberately. Anger surged through me as I pieced everything together clearly. They endangered my foundation, risking collapse for their greedy scheme. I needed undeniable proof before confronting authorities or neighbors publicly. Using my phone, I scanned documents left behind carelessly there. Blueprints detailed tunnels branching beneath multiple homes in Willow Ridge. It was an underground network exploiting everyone without their knowledge. Financial spreadsheets showed millions diverted into shell companies overseas quietly. Karen signed off on everything using HOA authority unlawfully, blatantly. I uploaded copies to secure cloud storage immediately for safety. If anything happened to me, the evidence would survive regardless. Carefully I retraced my steps back toward my basement exit. My heart raced imagining them discovering me down there unexpectedly. But luck stayed with me and I emerged unnoticed safely. Upstairs my house felt different, knowing betrayal lurked below everything. I called a trusted friend who worked in city inspections. He agreed to meet secretly to review what I found. Together we planned how to expose the HOA legally safely. The next move would determine whether justice finally prevailed here. I was no longer just a homeowner but a whistleblower. Everything they built in darkness was about to face light. This secret tunnel had started a battle they would lose. And my determination hardened with every truth uncovered that night. No HOA tyrant could silence me now, armed with evidence. I prepared to confront Karen and her co-conspirators soon. First I needed officials present to witness their lies unravel. The trap was set and their downfall was finally inevitable. Justice was coming through this very tunnel beneath my home. By the time morning arrived, I was running on coffee and pure adrenaline. I hadn't slept at all, replaying every detail of the tunnel and those incriminating documents in my mind. When I stepped outside, Willow Ridge looked just as peaceful as ever, with sprinklers ticking and birds chirping like nothing was wrong. That calm made the betrayal feel even worse. Everyone here trusted the HOA to protect the neighborhood, not quietly bleed it dry from beneath our feet. My friend Marcus arrived just after sunrise. He worked for the city's building inspection department, and when I showed him the videos and blueprints on my phone, his face went pale. "Alex," he whispered, "this isn't just an HOA violation. This is a massive criminal operation. They're risking structural failures, not to mention committing fraud on a huge scale." We went down into the basement together. Marcus knelt beside the hidden opening and shined his professional-grade flashlight inside. He immediately pointed out how poorly reinforced some sections were. "If they keep digging," he said, "your house could sink. Same with the others on this block." That was all the confirmation I needed. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore, I was protecting every family living above those tunnels. Marcus contacted his supervisor and discreetly requested a special inspection order. Within hours, 2 unmarked city vehicles parked a few houses away. We decided to act quickly before the HOA caught wind of what was happening. The plan was simple: lure Karen into making a public denial while inspectors quietly gathered evidence underground. I walked into the HOA office like nothing was wrong. Karen greeted me with her usual tight smile, but I could tell she was uneasy. "I'm still hearing noises under my house," I said casually. "I'm worried something serious is happening." She waved a dismissive hand. "You're overreacting, Alex. It's just old pipes settling. There is absolutely no construction happening beneath your property." Her words were smooth, but her eyes darted away for just a split second, long enough for me to know she was lying. Outside, Marcus and the inspectors entered the tunnel through my basement. They documented everything: the machinery, the supports, the illegal connections to utility lines. When they reached the hidden access point under the HOA building, they found stacks of paperwork and hard drives filled with financial records. It was even worse than I had imagined. Minutes later, the police arrived. Karen's confident smile vanished when officers escorted her out of her office in handcuffs. Neighbors gathered in stunned silence as investigators sealed off the building. I stood there watching it all unfold, feeling a mix of shock, relief, and a strange sense of victory. The secret they'd buried under my home was finally in the open. And this was only the beginning of their downfall. The arrest of Karen sent shockwaves through Willow Ridge, but the full story was still buried almost as deep as the tunnels themselves. Newsvans began lining the street, their antennas pointed at my house like I was suddenly the center of the world. Reporters shouted questions, but I stayed quiet, letting the investigators do their work. I knew the truth would be powerful enough without me saying a word. Over the next few days, city engineers and police officers combed through the underground network. They found tunnels beneath nearly a dozen homes, all leading back to the HOA office. Utility meters had been tampered with, rerouting water and power into a hidden system that allowed the HOA to sell it off to nearby commercial properties. The money never went back to the neighborhood. It went into shell companies that Karen and a few board members controlled. When my neighbors learned what had happened, the mood shifted from confusion to fury. People I'd barely spoken to before were suddenly knocking on my door, thanking me for uncovering the truth. Some were angry, others frightened, but all of them realized just how close we'd come to disaster. A few more months of digging and several houses might have collapsed. One evening, Marcus returned with a stack of documents. "They're going to need your testimony," he said. "You're the one who discovered the tunnel, and your evidence is the backbone of this case." The idea of going to court made my stomach twist, but I knew I couldn't back down now. At the emergency community meeting, the remaining HOA board members tried to distance themselves from Karen. They claimed they'd been misled, that they had no idea what was happening underground. But the investigators had already found emails proving otherwise. One by one, the lies unraveled. The HOA was officially placed under city control, and residents were told their fees had been fraudulently inflated for years. Refunds were coming, and criminal charges were being prepared. Willow Ridge, once a picture-perfect neighborhood hiding a rotten core, was finally getting a chance to start over. Late that night, I went back into my basement and looked at the now sealed tunnel. It felt strange knowing that something so dangerous had been right beneath me the whole time. But instead of fear, I felt pride. I hadn't ignored the warning signs. I'd followed them, and in doing so, I'd protected not just my home, but an entire community. And the story wasn't over yet. The court case was still ahead, and Karen was about to face the consequences of everything she'd done. The courtroom was nothing like the quiet streets of Willow Ridge. It buzzed with tension, reporters filling every bench, waiting for the moment Karen would be brought in. When she finally appeared, dressed in a stiff gray suit, she no longer looked like the confident HOA manager who once dismissed my fears. She looked small, cornered by the truth she could no longer outrun. I took the stand and told my story from the very beginning. I described the noises under my floor, the hidden tunnel, and the documents I found. As I spoke, the jury watched the videos from my phone on a large screen. The images of dark passageways and illegal machinery made more than a few people gasp. Karen kept her eyes down, but I could feel her anger burning across the room. The prosecution laid out the financial records next. Millions of dollars had been stolen from homeowners and funneled into private accounts. The tunnels were the key to the entire operation, allowing the HOA to control utilities and profit without anyone noticing. Every piece of evidence pointed back to Karen and her closest allies on the board. When Karen's lawyer tried to paint me as an overreacting homeowner, the judge shut him down. "The physical evidence speaks for itself," she said firmly. And it did. The tunnels existed. The money was gone. The lies were undeniable. Outside the courthouse, my neighbors waited. When I stepped out, they applauded, not because the case was over yet, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. For years, they'd been unknowingly exploited. Now, they had a chance to reclaim what was theirs. The trial lasted weeks, but the outcome became clearer with each passing day. One by one, Karen's co-conspirators accepted plea deals, admitting their roles in the scheme. They turned on her, revealing how she'd orchestrated everything from the start. By the time closing arguments were made, there was no doubt left. The tunnels, the stolen money, the danger to our homes, it all traced back to her. As I sat in the courtroom, waiting for the verdict, I realized something important. I hadn't just exposed a crime. I'd proven that even an ordinary person could stand up to a powerful, corrupt system and win. And the jury was about to make that victory official. The jury returned after only 6 hours, and that alone told me everything. When the foreperson stood up, the entire courtroom went silent. Karen stared straight ahead, her face pale and rigid, as if she already knew what was coming. The words "guilty on all counts" hit the room like a thunderclap. Some people gasped, others cried, but Karen didn't move. It was over. She was sentenced to decades in prison for fraud, endangerment, and organized financial crimes. Her accomplices received lesser sentences, but the damage they caused would follow them forever. Willow Ridge finally had justice, though no verdict could undo the fear and risk they'd forced on all of us. In the weeks that followed, crews arrived to safely dismantle and fill in the tunnels. My basement was reinforced, and so were the foundations of every affected house. Engineers worked carefully, making sure nothing like this could ever happen again. Watching the heavy equipment pour concrete into the dark passages felt like watching a wound finally close. The city appointed a temporary management team to oversee the neighborhood. HOA fees were slashed, audits were performed, and residents were refunded a portion of the money that had been stolen. Slowly, trust began to return. One afternoon, I was standing in my yard when a group of neighbors approached. They thanked me, not just with words, but with gestures: homemade food, small gifts, and invitations to gatherings I'd never been included in before. For the first time since moving in, Willow Ridge actually felt like a community. Yet, despite all the good that came from it, the experience had changed me. I couldn't forget how easily corruption had hidden in plain sight, buried just beneath a layer of polite smiles and manicured lawns. It made me more aware, more cautious, but also more confident in my ability to stand up when something feels wrong. At night, I sometimes still thought about that first faint vibration under my floor. A tiny warning that led to something enormous. If I'd ignored it, everything would have collapsed literally and figuratively. But I didn't ignore it. And because of that, an entire neighborhood was safer. Still, one last surprise was waiting for me, something I never expected to come out of this ordeal. Just when I thought everything was finally behind me, I received a call from the city attorney's office. They asked me to come in immediately, saying they'd uncovered something new while digging through Karen's seized files. My stomach tightened as I drove downtown, unsure what kind of shadow could still be lurking after everything we'd already exposed. In a quiet conference room, the attorney slid a folder across the table. Inside were property deeds, old surveys, and a series of financial agreements that made my head spin. "Your house," she said carefully, "wasn't chosen randomly. Karen targeted it because the land beneath it holds mineral rights the HOA planned to exploit." It turned out that decades ago, Willow Ridge had been built over a small but valuable vein of rare earth minerals. The original developer had quietly retained partial rights, which later ended up in the HOA's control. Karen discovered this and realized that by tunneling under specific homes, she could access the deposits without alerting state regulators. My property happened to sit right above the richest section. The realization made me feel sick. My home wasn't just a convenient access point, it was the key to her entire future fortune. If she'd succeeded, she would have made tens of millions, and I might have been left with a collapsing house and nothing to show for it. But there was a twist. Because the HOA had illegally altered property lines and dug without permits, all of their mineral claims were now void. The rights reverted to the homeowners who owned the land above them, including me. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who stopped a corrupt HOA. I was the owner of land that could be worth a small fortune. The attorney explained my options: I could sell the rights to a mining company, lease them, or keep them untouched. Whatever I chose, it was now my decision, not some crooked board's secret plan. As I drove home, the irony wasn't lost on me. The same tunnel meant to steal from me had ended up giving me more than I ever imagined. Still, money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that the truth had come out, and power had shifted back to where it belonged. And now, I had one final choice to make about how this story would end. After weeks of thinking it over, I made a decision that surprised almost everyone. I didn't sell the mineral rights to the highest bidder, even though the offers were tempting. Instead, I partnered with a small, environmentally responsible firm that agreed to operate transparently and share profits with the entire neighborhood. If anything was going to come out of what Karen started, it would be something that actually benefited the people she tried to exploit. The agreement was written into a community trust. Every homeowner in Willow Ridge would receive a share of the revenue, helping pay for infrastructure, schools, and emergency services. It felt like turning something ugly into something genuinely good. Construction crews arrived again, but this time everything was out in the open. Permits were posted, safety inspections were constant, and every resident knew exactly what was happening and why. The secrecy that once defined our neighborhood was gone, replaced by accountability. As for my house, it became something of a landmark. People joked that it was ground zero for the whole scandal. I didn't mind. It reminded me how close we'd come to losing everything and how far we'd come since then. One evening, Marcus and I sat on my porch watching the sunset. "You know," he said, "most people would have taken the money and walked away. You turned it into something that helps everyone." I shrugged, feeling a quiet sense of peace. After what we went through, it just felt right. Willow Ridge slowly transformed. The roads were repaved, the park was renovated, and the HOA, now run by a new, resident-elected board, became something it was always supposed to be, a service, not a threat. Looking back, it was almost unbelievable how one strange noise under my floor had changed everything. What started as fear had become a chance for renewal. All that was left now was to see how the community, and my own life, would move forward from here. The first anniversary of Karen's arrest arrived quietly, without the sirens and chaos that had once defined Willow Ridge. Instead, it came with a neighborhood barbecue in the park, where kids ran through sprinklers and neighbors laughed together like they'd known each other forever. I stood there with a plate in my hand, watching the community I'd almost lost become stronger than it had ever been. My house no longer felt like a place of danger. The reinforced basement and sealed ground beneath it gave me peace of mind, but more than that, it was the memories that had changed. What was once a symbol of betrayal had become a reminder of resilience. People still joked about the tunnel, but now it was more legend than threat, a story about how greed tried to dig its way to victory and failed. The community trust had already started paying out small dividends. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to fund new playground equipment, scholarships, and a neighborhood emergency fund. Every time I saw something improve around Willow Ridge, I felt a quiet pride knowing it all started with standing up and saying, "Something isn't right." Marcus eventually transferred to a different district, but we stayed friends. We'd sometimes meet for coffee and laugh about how close we'd come to disaster. He always said the same thing: most people walk away from trouble, but I walked straight into it and changed everything because of it. As for me, I kept living in the same house, the same neighborhood, but with a new sense of purpose. I paid closer attention, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. If corruption could hide under my floor once, it could hide anywhere. And now I knew I had the strength to confront it. Sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd think back to that first faint vibration. The moment that set everything in motion. It reminded me that even the smallest warning can lead to the biggest revelations if you're brave enough to listen. And that's how I came out on top, not because I was lucky, but because I refused to look away when the ground beneath me started to shift.